At some point today, you probably lied. Not a big one. I'm fine. Sorry, I'm running late. Traffic was crazy. No, you look great in that. Small, automatic, almost invisible. You barely register it as lying at all. Now ask yourself something stranger. When did the first human ever do this? Not the first person who made a mistake or misremembered something. The first person who looked at another human being, understood exactly what was true, and deliberately said something else. The answer is not what you'd expect, and it might be one of the most important moments in the entire story of human intelligence. Let's start with what lying actually requires. This sounds simple. It isn't. To lie successfully, you need something called theory of mind. That's the ability to understand that another creature has a mind separate from your own. Beliefs, knowledge, perspective that might be different from what you know. If you don't have that, lying is literally impossible. Not morally impossible, cognitively impossible. Because if you can't model what's happening inside someone else's head, you have no way to create a false belief inside it. You can't deceive a mind you don't know exists. This is why most animals can't lie in the way humans do. A dog can hide a bone, but hiding is not the same as lying. Hiding just requires moving an object out of sight. Lying requires understanding that another mind will form an incorrect belief and engineering that belief on purpose. So when did this capacity actually show up? In 1978, psychologists David Premack and Guy Woodruff published a now famous paper asking a deceptively simple question. Does the chimpanzee have a theory of mind? Their research suggested something remarkable. Chimpanzees showed early signs of understanding that other individuals had separate knowledge and intentions. Researchers later expanded this work and found something even more specific. In a series of experiments throughout the 1990s, primatologist Frans de Waal and others documented something they called tactical deception in chimpanzees. Here's one famous example. A subordinate male chimpanzee discovers a hidden cache of food. If a dominant male is nearby, the subordinate does something specific. He does not approach the food. He acts completely uninterested. He may even walk in the opposite direction, wait, and circle back later when the dominant male isn't watching. This is not an accident. Researchers documented the same individual chimpanzees performing this behavior repeatedly, specifically when a dominant animal was present, and never when they were alone. This means the chimpanzee understood something crucial. If I show interest in this food, the other chimp will know it's valuable and take it. If I act like there's nothing here, he won't know. That is a working model of another mind, and that model is the foundation lying is built on. But chimpanzees and humans split from a common ancestor roughly 6 to 7 million years ago. So the real question is, when did this capacity evolve? Or at least dramatically intensify in the human lineage specifically? This is where things get genuinely fascinating. Because we cannot dig up a fossilized lie, there's no skeleton that shows deception, so researchers had to get creative. In 2007, developmental psychologist Victoria Talwar conducted a series of studies that, combined with decades of related research, gave us an extraordinary window into when deception emerges in human development. Here's what they found. Children begin lying remarkably early. Around age 2.5 to 3, children start engaging in simple denial, saying, "I didn't do it," even when caught directly in the act. This is considered a primitive form of lying, but researchers debate whether it counts as true deception because at this age, children may not yet fully understand that the listener has a separate false belief being created. But by age 4, something shifts dramatically. Talwar's classic experiment worked like this. A child is left alone in a room with a toy behind them, told explicitly not to peek. Hidden cameras record what happens. The vast majority of children peek within minutes. Then the researcher returns and asks, "Did you peek at the toy?" Here's the critical data point. Almost all children under 3 who peeked confessed immediately when asked. But by age 4, the majority of children who peeked said no. They lied. And it wasn't a clumsy lie. When asked to describe what the toy was, despite never having seen it, 4-year-olds who lied were significantly better than 3-year-olds at constructing a plausible cover story, guessing rather than confidently describing the hidden object as if they'd genuinely never seen it. This means something happened, cognitively, somewhere between ages 3 and 4. The child's brain developed a working model sophisticated enough to track not just what is true, but what does this other person currently believe, and how do I manage that belief? This lines up almost perfectly with one of the most replicated findings in developmental psychology, the false belief task, often called the Sally Ann test. First formally tested in 1983 by Heinz Wimmer and Joseph Perner, the setup is simple. A child watches a puppet show. Sally puts a marble in a basket and leaves the room. While she's gone, Anne moves the marble to a box. Sally returns. The child is asked, "Where will Sally look for her marble?" A child who understands theory of mind says, "The basket," because that's where Sally believes it is, even though the child knows it's actually in the box. A child who does not yet have full theory of mind says, "The box," because that's where it actually is, and they cannot yet separate their own knowledge knowledge from someone else's. Across hundreds of replications in dozens of countries, the same pattern holds. Children reliably fail this task before about age 4. They reliably pass it after. This is essentially the exact developmental window in which lying becomes possible, not as a moral choice, but as a cognitive capability. Before age 4, in a very real sense, the architecture for deception literally isn't built yet. So if every human child crosses this threshold around age 4, what does that tell us about our species? It suggests theory of mind and the capacity for deception that comes with it isn't something humans learn from culture. It's something built into typical human neurological development, which means it almost certainly evolved. And this is where the story gets evolutionarily significant. In 1988, primatologists Richard Byrne and Andrew Whiten proposed something called the Machiavellian intelligence hypothesis. Their argument was bold. They proposed that primate intelligence, and especially human intelligence, didn't evolve primarily to solve problems like finding food or navigating terrain. It evolved primarily to navigate the social complexity of living in large groups, specifically to outmaneuver, predict, and sometimes deceive other members of your own species. Byrne and Whiten compiled data across primate species and found something striking. The frequency of observed tactical deception correlated directly with neocortex size, the part of the brain most associated with complex thought. Species with larger neocortices relative to body size showed dramatically more documented instances of deceptive behavior. Humans have, by a significant margin, the largest neocortex relative to body size of any primate. The implication is unsettling but compelling. Some of the same cognitive machinery that makes us capable of complex cooperation, empathy, and language may have evolved hand in hand with our capacity to deceive each other. Not despite our social intelligence, because of it. But here's where it gets even more specific, because lying isn't actually one single skill. Researchers studying cognitive development distinguish between at least 2 different layers. The first is what's called first-order theory of mind. I know something you don't. The second, which develops slightly later and is significantly more demanding, is second-order theory of mind. I know that you believe something that is different from what I know you would believe if you knew what I know. This sounds confusing because it is. It requires holding multiple, nested, conflicting models of belief in your head simultaneously. Psychologist Joseph Perner found that second-order theory of mind typically doesn't fully mature until somewhere between ages 6 and 7. This is also, not coincidentally, roughly the age at which children's lies become significantly more sophisticated. Not just "I didn't do it," but strategic lies, built specifically to anticipate what the listener already suspects and adjusted to seem more credible because of it. A 6 or 7-year-old doesn't just lie. They lie about how they think you'll react to the lie. This is an extraordinary cognitive achievement, and it almost certainly maps onto a much longer evolutionary timeline. So when, in human evolutionary history, did this capacity likely emerge? We can't know with certainty. There's no fossil evidence for a lie. But anthropologists have used an indirect method, looking at group size. Evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar, whose research you may know from his famous number, the maximum stable social group size of roughly 150 individuals, argued that social complexity itself is what drove neocortex expansion in primates, and especially in humans. Larger groups mean more relationships to track. More relationships mean more competing interests. More competing interests create more situations where deception becomes strategically useful, sometimes even necessary for survival or status. Early Homo sapiens, living in groups that anthropological estimates place at roughly 25 to 150 individuals, would have faced constant daily pressure to track who knew what, who suspected what, and how to manage what others believed about you. In that environment, an individual with even a slightly better capacity for theory of mind, and yes, deception, would have had a real survival and reproductive advantage. They could form better alliances, avoid punishment more effectively, negotiate more successfully. Over hundreds of thousands of years and uncountable generations, that pressure would have compounded. Here's where it connects to you. The lie you told this morning, "I'm fine, traffic was crazy, you look great," isn't a moral failing or a character flaw. It's the output of one of the most sophisticated cognitive systems that evolution has ever produced. A system that requires you to simultaneously hold what is true, what you want someone else to believe, and a working model of their entire mind, updated in real time, often in under a second. Most animals cannot do this at all. Even our closest relatives can only do a simplified version of it. You do it so easily, so automatically, that you barely notice you're doing it dozens of times a day. The first human who ever truly lied, who looked at another mind, understood it as separate from their own, and deliberately shaped what it believed, wasn't a villain. They were, in a very real evolutionary sense, one of the most cognitively advanced individuals who had ever lived. Because to lie, you first have to understand someone else's entire inner world well enough to bend it. And every time you do it without even thinking, that effortless, automatic understanding of another person's mind, you're running the same extraordinary machinery that may have helped build human civilization in the first place.